What's happening, guys? Steve here, Cars with Steve, and today we are going to be doing something a little bit different. So what we're actually going to be doing is taking a look at the 2020 Ford EcoSport, and we're going to be comparing that to the 2020 Ford Escape. So guys, it's essentially a battle of the small crossover SUVs from the world of Ford, and the question that you're asking yourself, and the reason why we're doing this is, should I be buying the Ford EcoSport or should I be looking at the 2020 Ford Escape? Let's dive right into it and see what these vehicles are all about. All right, so a couple things to start off with right from the get-go. So as we can see, the Ford EcoSport on the right-hand side here is a little bit of a smaller SUV. We've got them lined up side by side there, and we've got about an extra foot in comparison between the two vehicles. Now, a couple other things to point out that make these vehicles a little bit unique. Now, the Ford EcoSport is the only Ford vehicle that's got the capabilities to do this. We've got a tailgate that swings out, or a trunk door, I should say, that swings out to the side, whereas in the Escape, it's going to be your traditional up and down instead. That is one of the big differences between these two vehicles. Now, as we dive inside of these things, we've got the EcoSport. The EcoSport's either got a 1-liter turbo or a 2-liter naturally aspirated, so a non-turboed engine. That's going to depend on the trim level of the vehicle that you get. Now, when it comes to the Ford Escape, I should say, in comparison, it's either got a 1.5-liter turbo or a 2-liter turbo instead. You're going to have a little bit of better gas mileage out of those smaller engines, but having said that, they both do come in front-wheel drive or all-wheel drive. So whether you get front-wheel drive or all-wheel drive, really a matter of personal preference. The ultimate question you got to be asking yourself is, what are you going to be doing with these vehicles? Let's take a spin in between, and let's actually start off looking in the back side of these things. Taking a look at the EcoSport, so as we can see, it is a little bit of a smaller back to it. So we do have a little bit of a tonneau cover, so a privacy shade in the back. We can also get that in the Escape, but let's start off on the EcoSport. Taking a look here, one big thing to point out, so one big difference in the back, so as you can see there, we've got an inflator kit. The EcoSport does not have the option to have a mini spare tire, whereas the Escape does. Now, EcoSport, you also have the ability to fold the seats down, very straightforward to do that, but the EcoSport does it slightly differently in comparison, or has the capability, I should say, to do it slightly differently in comparisons. If we take a look, that's the basic way to fold down the EcoSport seats. Now, having said that, there is one way to do it slightly differently. What we're gonna do is pop that seat up. We can then take this tab and lift it up, and then as you can see, we've now got quite a little bit of space. That actual passenger seat's a little bit inconveniently placed, but regardless, let's see if we can get this to work. Oh, this is different. All right, there we go, perfect. So as you can see there, that's very unique to the EcoSport. The Escape does not have the capabilities to do it. So where that comes into play is if you need a little bit of extra flat space, because we've got the tray in the back that can now be adjusted. Really neat. Now, we are looking at the SE versions of both vehicles. Now, the reason why we're not looking at the S is because of this productivity screen. So this center console screen is very unique. It is the Sync 3 screen, which gives you Android Auto and Apple CarPlay. Now, the reason why we want to look at this as an option rather than, let's go for a walk. Where are we? Here we go. Okay, this is the Escape S. So this is your base S vehicle. It is the same roughly for the EcoSport as well. They do have the S capability, but one thing to point out, look at that. Look at that little guy, look at that little screen. You can make phone calls, hook your phone up, but that's really about it. Realistically, the S trim levels of these vehicles, if you don't really care about technology whatsoever, they are good options, but realistically, if you're contemplating maybe trading it in, or, you know, at the same time, maybe you want to look at upgrading the vehicle at a later point in time, you'd want to look at something with that Sync 3 screen, because it's going to give you Android Auto and Apple CarPlay. But if you don't care about technology whatsoever, you absolutely could look at the Escape S to save yourself a couple $100, and it's the same thing with the EcoSport. The S model is going to be a few dollars cheaper in comparison. So, having said that, let's take a quick peek inside of the EcoSport and see what it's all about. Let's pop that seat back up, lock her back into place, get that seat back down. There we go. As you can see there, it is a little bit tight in the back of this vehicle. So if you're getting it under the intention of just driving it yourself, it's a good buy. If you're just doing something, you know, getting around town, etc., again, same thing, good buy. Both vehicles standard are going to have the blind spot system. So that's something new for the 2020 year. So the blind spot system on both vehicles, it's essentially going to let you know if anybody's entered the blind spot on either side of the vehicle. Highlight orange there. As we as we hop, I should say, inside of this thing. Larger Sync 3 screen as we fire it up. We're gonna have our little welcome message. Looking down as we go. So we've got our gear shifter. Now that is unique to the EcoSport. The 2020 Escape no longer has a traditional gear shift. It is going to be a rotary dial instead. So in the EcoSport, we've got the gear shift, we've got the auto engine start stop, we've got single zone climate control, heated seats. This thing does have a few extras in the package, which is why it has some of these little extra gizmos. Now, one thing to note is that in the EcoSport S, there is a package which gives you this screen, and it also gives you this little guy. So this little window, this little moonroof right above us here. But as we can see there, in the EcoSport, when you get this Sync 3 screen, it's going to have factory navigation built in, and that's going to come as a default. Whereas in the Escape, you have to add in the navigation after the fact. It's going to be in the Copilot 360 package. Really, really straightforward. As you can see here, we've got the ability to adjust some things. We've got our, we've got our turn signals. We've got the basics. So really, really simple vehicle, guys. You'd want this vehicle if you are looking for something very, very basic. And again, you might not be looking at a bigger SUV. That's where this thing would come into play. So starting MSRP there. So the one thing to point out on the window sticker. So if we take a peek there, we've got, all right, so I don't know if you can make it out. We've got the SE Convenience Package. So that is an add-on package. It's going to give you that Sync 3 screen, and it gives us that moonroof. If you don't want that as an option, you don't have to take it. But again, if you don't get this package, you're going to have that smaller screen that we just finished seeing in the Escape. Again, really, really unique look and feel to this thing. Now, as we get into the Escape, so it is new, redesigned for 2020. I personally love the look of it. I'm just gonna pull the trunk down for a second here, this latch. I love, love, love the look of this. Look at that, Escape, absolutely stunning. This thing is beautiful. The look of it is great, but again, it is a matter of personal preference because we've got the rear window wiper in both vehicles. That's gonna be standard. We've got the backup camera. Same thing, backup camera on both vehicles. That's also gonna be standard. So what else makes this thing different? As you can see there, right from the get-go, we have a ton more space in the back. A little bit wider, a little bit deeper, and the other thing to point out, we also have a mini spare tire. So again, something that's unique to the Escape that is not in the EcoSport. So mini spare tire with the jack underneath. We can see it just down there. Got a little bit of storage along the sides as well. Closing that down. All right, now same thing, it is very, very straightforward in order to fold the seats in this thing. I guess it helps if the door's unlocked. Okay, so as we can see there, a little bit more spacey in the back as well. Like you got a couple extra inches here, which again, is really, really useful, especially if you've got taller passengers, people sitting in the back. So very straightforward to fold the seats down. We can do that by pressing and down. So as you can see, still a ton of space in the back of this thing. Even though it doesn't have that capability of pulling up the back seat like the EcoSport, we can still fit a ton of things in the back of this vehicle. Switching out to the back. Hopping inside of the back, so this was standard on the EcoSport as well, so we did have cup holders available on the EcoSport and the Escape. Sizing of this thing is not too shabby, so this one obviously doesn't have the sunroof. I've got about 1.5 inches, I would say, maybe of headspace in the back here, and the driver's seat is also set up for somebody who's 6 feet tall, and I still have leg room. I'm actually just going to jump back to the EcoSport to show you the difference between the two. Oh, this is interesting. Interesting style video here. This is a little bit unique. All right, so the driver's seat set up for somebody who's 6 feet tall. I'm 6 feet tall. Look at that difference in the legroom back there. So as you can see, so it's a little bit tighter inside. If you've got a taller driver or passenger, you are not gonna have the legroom in the back, unfortunately. So somebody who's, 6'3", 6'4", 6'5", etc., will not get into the back of this thing, or the front of this thing comfortably. Now, looking up overhead, so the twin panel moonroof essentially does not exist in the EcoSport. We are looking at this smaller one up ahead. But as you can see, I've got some headroom, I've still got some legroom. So again, the sizing wise, they're not too far off from each other. There is a difference though. Now, another thing to point out is that in the EcoSport, the seats are fixed. So you don't have the capabilities to move them or adjust them, whereas in the Escape you do. So let's point that out for a second. There we go. So as you can see, we've got this slider. So we do have the capability. Oh, this is more difficult when I'm not inside. All right. So we've got the capability to move the seat forwards and backwards. So if you need a little bit more space in the back, you've got the capabilities to do that, which is really, really cool. So let's hop inside of the front seat now. This so you can take it a little gander. Now, one thing to point out is, as I mentioned, in the Escape S, we're gonna have that smaller screen. This is the SE. So we've got that 8-inch productivity screen here instead. Turning the vehicle on. One thing to point out is that in the Escape, navigation will not come standard. We do have to add it on. It is an add-on package. It's the same way with the EcoSport. But with the EcoSport, you get that package, you get Sync 3 with navigation and the sunroof. Whereas in the Escape, when you get the Sync 3 system, you have to add navigation in, and you'd also have to add the sunroof. So this one doesn't have it, but it is available as an option. Now, when we actually dive down to it, one thing to point out right from the get-go is we don't have the gear shift. The EcoSport did, and we're now looking at a rotary dial instead. So very, very unique. That was something that was added in the Escape as of this model year. All right, perfect. Yeah, so that was added as of this model year. We've got our parking brake, we've got our auto hold setting, different drive modes, and our auto engine start stop as well. As we come on, we're looking at the single zone climate control. We can, again, very, very similar setup to the Escape, or to the EcoSport, I should say. We've got the heated seats in the front. Unfortunately, no heated steering wheel in this specific model. When it comes down to the actual cluster screen, and the instrument cluster, I should say, so a couple things to point out. One thing to note about the Escape, we've got our lane keeping system as a default. So we can turn that on or off by pressing this button. See a little button over there that's going to appear and disappear as necessary. And we've also got our cruise control, so our adaptive cruise. So the adaptive cruise is great. It's essentially a set it and forget it cruise control. So really, 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 really useful, especially if you're a fan of driving. Oh yeah, adaptive cruise, speed too low to activate, which totally makes sense because we are not driving. But the adaptive cruise control is a set it and forget it cruise control, so you don't need to worry about braking. The vehicle will do that for you and then pick you back up to speed again. That's great, there we go. So small differences, subtle differences between these two things. Hopping on the outside, so looking at the two vehicles side by side. So as you can see there, the EcoSport on the left, so the black vehicle there in the front, there is quite a little bit of difference when it comes down to the actual body styling of this thing as well. So the Escape, it just seems a lot smoother. It's just rounded a little bit more. It's bubbled out a little bit more. Personal preference, I like the look of the new Escape compared to the EcoSport, but it's ultimately going to come down to what your budget is, because if we look at the SE version of the Escape versus the EcoSport, with this package, the SE convenience package, so they're built somewhat similar, we're looking at $31,749. Hopping over in comparison to the Escape, we're $34,849 instead. So we are looking at a $3,000 difference between the two vehicles. Now, other thing to point out, this thing is four-wheel drive versus an all-wheel drive. So I want to thank you guys so much. This is the first video of this style. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, make sure you drop them down below. If you enjoyed the video, hit that like button, and please consider subscribing to the channel because it does help me grow. Until I see you guys next time, stay safe.